At every twist and turn, what we see is an attack on success.
Hello and welcome to This Week in Review with Nigel Farage. Nigel, I want to take you back to school and ask you to compare and contrast two newspaper articles to see what you make of the combination of them. I find it a bit odd. The first one says, nasty shock waiting for high earners in retirement. Only 1 in 3 wealthy households on track for a comfortable later life. The idea is that households earning above £100,000 a year are not on track to have a comfortable lifestyle in retirement. The second article says, slash tax breaks on savings for the wealthy, ministers told. ISA savings could be capped at £100,000 to stop wealthy families from benefiting too much from costly and unnecessary tax breaks, a leading think tank and charity have said. What do you make of that combination?
Well, it's the war on wealth, isn't it? And in particular, the war on pensions. This began back in 97, when we actually used to boast that we had the greatest private pension provision of any country in the Western world. For those that are shaking their heads, I promise you, that was absolutely where we were. And then Gordon Brown, the genius, decided he would tax dividends. But of course, if you look at a long-term 30-year graph of money invested in stock markets, in pension funds, and returns at the end, it is the compounding of reinvesting the dividends that gives the really big number. So that was when the war on pensions really began. It's continued relentlessly under this Conservative government, and they keep lowering the top amount of money that you're allowed to actually put into your private pension pot. And with low interest rates, yes, they've gone up, but they're still quite low interest rates. These pensions are not yielding anything like the living standard that the previous 2 or 3 generations who had similar private pension schemes had. And now ISAs, ISAs were one of the last really big breaks, ways of building up money. And now they're talking about a cap on that. It's 20,000 a year is the amount you can put in, and any profit you get on it, whether that's interest profit, capital gain profit, and they're actually going to put a limit on that of 100,000. So at every twist and turn, what we see is an attack on success. And politicians think that those that are poor will think, hooray, we're punishing the rich. Well, you know what? The top 1% of taxpayers are currently paying 29% of all tax received in Britain. The top 10% pay 53% of all money received in the country. And what I've seen, and I promise you I'm not wrong on this, the brain drain has begun. Milano, in particular, doing great deals for businessmen and women that want to go for 5 years, and Portugal attracting a lot of younger people. Nice place, great lifestyle, lovely people, 20 flights a day to London. You're allowed 90 days a year in the UK, and you will pay no tax at all for the first 5 years. And what's alarmed me most are people I've met recently between sort of 28 and 38, that kind of age bracket, young entrepreneurs, often in tech, where they can do a lot of work from home, but occasionally need to meet people. So the brain drain has begun. And if we go on, the way we are, we've talked just now about pensions and ISAs, but think about income. When 40p was established as the top rate of tax in 1988, 1.5 million people were top rate taxpayers. Today, with the proposals in place by Jeremy Hunt, it will be 8 million. 8 million paying 40p or more. And I just feel that for those that are at work, they increasingly feel they're working harder and harder for an awful lot of people that have decided just they don't, frankly, want to work. It's being pumped into public services where we're not getting anything like bang for the buck. And I was funny, yesterday, I was having coffee in Westminster, yesterday morning before a TV interview, a couple of lads in there, early 40s, plasterers, both running their own company, and both employing a couple of youngsters. And they just said, why are we bothering? Why are we bothering? Why are we working so hard? Why are we paying more and more and more? Why are our taxes, company taxes, going up so much on the 1st of April? Sort of almost a sense of despair amongst people who are genuinely self-starters, hard workers. And by the way, these people get no holiday pay. they're doing their own thing. So all of this has happened under a Conservative government, which is why I think Rishi Sunak is holding emergency meetings in Chequers with the cabinet. Although I bet not many people will offer to make coffee for Nadeem Zahawi. And I just think, this is full-blown, big state, big tax, high spend, social democracy. And I can't think in terms of economic optimism, despite the fact people will still go out many and try their best and work hard. But I can't think of a more depressing scenario in over 40 years.
Yeah, we're going to talk next about the windfall tax, which goes to exactly what the point you're making there. But I want to just focus on pensions a little bit longer, because there's a real element of bait and switch tactics here, where governments created a vast pool of funds by incentivizing people to save into ISAs and dividend stocks and all these sort of tax breaks for doing the right thing, for saving for your own retirement instead of relying on the government. Now that the money's in there and this big pool has been created, they're slapping taxes on it and they're putting caps on it. And if you've done the right thing, suddenly you're cornered, just like with the Gordon Brown story. And to me, that's bizarre, because this is a really big voting base, and it's the Conservative voting base. So what are they doing here?
Well, it was a big Conservative voting base, but increasingly middle-class people are happy to vote Labour, Liberal Democrat, and it's now more working-class people that have voted Conservative, although looking at our very porous borders, I'm not so sure they will again. I mean, it is an attack on the culture of thrift. And this distrust of governments is one of the main reasons why over 2 million people in Britain are invested in cryptocurrencies in some way. And just a quick thought on that. I mean, just think how much bad news has hit the cryptocurrency market. The FTX fraudulent collapse, the knock-on to a whole series of other bankruptcies. And yet people are saying, no, that's fine. We get it. It's a new industry. It's bound to have all sorts of problems. And yet, despite it all, there are still, and I think, a growing number of people who think, you know what, if I can get my money away from government, I feel more comfortable. And, in time, the same will apply to gold, I think, as well.
Yeah, we've been warning for so many years now about government debt and governments being over indebted. And finally, the last year or so, this has started to matter a lot. The bonds crashed, the inflation broke out, and now taxes are coming on the people who can supposedly afford to pay them, even though they can't save for retirement. So this is finally starting to matter, and crypto is one way out. But let's move on to the next two stories. Again, compare and contrast the two stories. See if you can find what they have in common, Nigel. Windfall tax raised 25% less than forecast in December, official data shows. And the second story, Harbour Energy has confirmed plans for a series of job cuts at its North Sea base in Aberdeen. Who would have thought?
What's the point? You put your money in, you make a profit, they tax you 75%. You put your money in, you take a loss, you take 100% of the loss. What is the point? What is the point? And, despite the fact that use of fossil fuels is at all-time highs. I mean, coal, for example, 8 billion tons, going to be burnt around the world this year. We have decided we will not frack gas. We will actually discourage investment in the North Sea. And it's awful. But you see, the worst of it is, it's a little bit like going back earlier to what you said about you encourage people to go to ISIS, then you punish them. So much of this taxation is retrospective. And if governments put retrospective taxes on companies and people, why should we trust them? And that's the problem. If you go for those industries, what next? What next? But if you're going to literally punish success, you stop investment. So, at every level, I think this Conservative government is in completely the wrong place. And Labour, well, the remarkable thing, okay, they want to attack non-doms and private schools, but beyond those two, Labour's policy is pretty much identical. We're back to, it was called Butskelism back in the 1960s. We saw a similar period of this during the time of Cameron and Miliband, when you frankly couldn't put a cigarette paper between these parties in terms of ideology or philosophy or belief. And that's exactly where we are today.
Yeah, it's an odd situation, and it explains a lot of the business confidence in Britain sliding to the lowest level since the global financial crisis, according to the Institute of Chartered Accountants, explaining the situation quite nicely there. Let's move on to the last story I want to ask you about, which is this bizarre situation. Again, it was two separate news stories that struck me as a bit odd, where the National Grid was asking people to use less energy while also exporting energy to Ireland, which strikes me as an odd combination. Not one that I have a problem with, but I think it's something that, I mean, the idea that you're going to do, energy sharing deals and also electrify the economy while not having enough electricity is a really bad combination.
So what happened earlier this week was it was very cold. -8 at Heathrow one morning, coldest night in London for 36 years. All right. So they sold it as, hey, turn your electricity off, you can save money. Isn't it wonderful? No, it's not wonderful. It shows you what a perilous position we're in, because they've realized when it's cold in Kent, you know what? It's pretty cold in Calais as well. And the worry was the energy we were importing from France through the interconnectors would stop because of French demand. That's why we did this. At the same time, Drax, the plant in Yorkshire that burns half of the North American forests every year because we're so green, don't ask me about that, we're getting ready to start burning coal again. I mean, these are repeated failures of any long-term energy strategy or planning at all. And as we rush headlong towards electrification of cars and everything else, these problems won't end. What you saw this week were the beginnings in Britain of energy rationing. Don't forget I said that.